Howdy, guys. I'm just going to shut the door real quick. Howdy, youngs. Okay, no Mountain Dew. I'm drinking a good old-fashioned Sprite today. Hey, Brad. Hey, Roundy. Hey, Wilsons. You have a Mountain Dew there, yeah? Well, today I'm going to be a little bit more healthy. Hey, can you guys hear me all right? Does this sound all right? Let's see. Nate 344. Let's get rid of him. How do I do that? Hey, Alma. Yeah, Sprite is more healthy. I agree. Hey, guys, we're going to get started here in just a second. I'm trying to figure out how to control some of these folks. Let's see. Yeah, I'm trying to ban someone, but I can't figure out how to do it. I guess got to be smarter than the tool you're working with. All right, we got about maybe one more minute, and then we'll get started. All right, hey, brother. Let's see, who is that? NL Boss. Wow. Man, to what do we owe the privilege? Awesome. All right, let me see if I can get this. Yeah, I'm in a white-walled enclosure. Yeah, that's true. There is a bookshelf over there, just for the record, but I'm trying to figure out how to make the most of this setup. So here. I'm not in the free capitalist layer, so the visual appearance is different every time. A little different every time we do a broadcast. So, all right, we're gonna get started here in just a second. I see that we're already starting to lose a few people. No, I'm not in a bunker, just in an office. All right, well, I couldn't help you guys. I want to go ahead and get started. I couldn't help but do a show today. There are two things on my mind that I really wanted to be talking about. Oh, you know what? I told everybody that I would be on Uber conference. Let me... God, I don't have the ability to do that right now. Let's see here. Yeah, man, I'm sorry. I know I advertised I'd be on Uber conference. I appreciate the reminder. I don't have the ability to... Oh, I might. I take that back. Hold on just a second, guys. Let's bring up... I knew there are some people on Uber conference. I don't leave them out, so I know how to do that. Hold on just a second. Yeah. See, I make you guys wait. See, we haven't done this for a while. I'm a little out of practice, so... No problem. Oh my goodness. Let's see if I can do it this way. So, we're going to talk about Dr. SKOUSEN today, and we're going to talk about what's going on up in Oregon and Ammon Bundy and that situation. So, get your questions ready, and we'll take those and we'll deal with those. So, I'm going to bring up Uber conference first, though. Hold on just a second. Uber conference. Thanks for the reminder. I don't know who reminded me of that, but that's great. All righty. All right. Look at that. Boy, we have people already in there waiting on Uber conference. That's great. So now I'm going to call in. Let's see.
Please enter an account code.
Oh, jeez.
Please enter an account code.
Hang tight, guys. I got to get an account code for Uber conference. Yeah, we're going to get Uber live here in just a second.
Please enter an account code. Welcome to International Access. Please enter the phone number of the Uber conference you want to join. Please enter an account code. Please wait for the organizer to join the conference. If you are the organizer, press 2. Enter your organizer PIN to start the conference.
Oh, sure.
Enter your organizer PIN to start the conference.
It's always
Enter
tricky.
your organizer PIN to start the conference.
Always tricky, tricky.
Please wait for the organizer to join the conference. If you are the organizer, press 2. Enter your organizer PIN to start the conference. Joining conference now. This call is being recorded.
All right, you guys on Uber conference, tell me if you can hear me. Andrew, you say you can hear me? All right, very good. Can't they use Siri's voice? All right, Denny, you're in a funny mood today. I'm going to ignore all of your random comments, if that's okay. All right, so 2 topics for the call, for the Periscope today. I wanted to talk about Dr. SKOUSEN because today is his 103rd birthday, if he were still alive. It's been 10 years since he passed. And I want to do a short tribute to Dr. SKOUSEN and talk about him and his legacy, particularly as it relates to the cause of freedom and to people who love liberty. And then I want to talk about civil disobedience in the cause of liberty, and particularly related to Ammon Bundy and what's going on up there in Oregon. All right, I just want to check here real quick and make sure. I just got a funny noise from Uber conference. Again, somebody over there on Uber conference, let me know if you can hear me all right.
I can hear you.
All right, very good. All right. So, for those of you who are familiar with my situation and Dr. SKOUSEN, I first met Dr. SKOUSEN back in 2004, and my first exposure to Dr. SKOUSEN was reading the book The Naked Communist. If you have not read The Naked Communist, I highly recommend that you get yourself a copy and take some time to seriously go through that. Don't just browse through it. Read it from cover to cover. It will be a very good investment of your time and a very good use of your mind. In my experience, I had a mentor who was a lover of liberty, and he was teaching people about the Constitution of the United States and about the founder's view of liberty. And he had these Cleon Skousen materials. I'd never met Cleon Skousen. I'd never heard of Cleon Skousen. And I had acquired some of his books and had kind of browsed through them and hadn't given much attention to them. And then, fast forward a little bit, I was an entrepreneur, ran a very successful internet business for a long period of time, and then I got involved in politics using, kind of the...
To unmute yourself, press the star key twice.
Good grief. You guys, Uber conference may be more trouble than it's worth, so I...
Mute off.
Don't know what's going on there. The forces of the universe are against this Uber conference and against this Periscope. So anyway, I, as an entrepreneur, ran into government regulators, state regulators, back in the state of Wyoming. And I was blown away. I'd grown up loving America and thinking all was fine and good about America and this kind of thing. I mean, I knew we had our problems and this kind of thing. But I didn't have any idea how tyrannical and overgrown our governments had become, our city governments, our county governments, our state governments, and our federal governments. I didn't have any idea. And I went toe-to-toe with some corrupt bureaucrats in the state of Wyoming and how they treated me, and they essentially put me out of business because of my political position. And I was surprised at that reality, and I was discouraged at that reality. And so what I did was after these bureaucrats essentially put me out of business for rather innocuous things that they had alleged, I gave up business, as some of you know. And then years later, I was going through a period of time where I was not in business mode, I was not in political mode, etc. And I came across Dr. SKOUSEN's book, The Naked Communist, and I read it. To be honest with you, I can't exactly remember what caused me to read it. And when I first picked it up, I thought, this is probably about something that was relevant in the 1960s, 1970s. When I read this in the 1990s or early 2000s, nobody was using terms like communism anymore. We'd won the Cold War. And so the idea of the naked communism is an old book. It had been marked up by a previous owner. And so I didn't imagine that it would be relevant for the cause of liberty in our day. And I didn't imagine, the naked communist, it didn't sound like a book full of principles to me, or a book full of truth, or this kind of thing. I just didn't have any concept. And so I'm thinking some of you may also be in that place. And I will tell you, when I read that book, not only did I find it easy to read and very informative, but I found it very enlightening and satisfying. And I found it very relevant. And even though the history that it talks about, and even though the political events that it talks about in that book are somewhat dated, the concepts and the teachings and the basic plain outlining of what communism is and what socialism is and what that conspiracy is and what that movement is, it was eye-opening. And when I got done with that book, I was both happy that I read the book, but I was also very upset because I saw that what the communists had predicted would happen in America was actually happening. What they said is, yeah, you guys are winning in the short term, but we have the long view. We're fighting the 50-year battle. And what they said in the 1960s and in the 1970s was, long after you have forgotten about us, we will have won because your people will embrace socialism and will embrace communism. They just won't call it by that name. And clearly, by 2016, that's almost indisputable by people who really think about our current situation. But when I first read that back in the late 1990s, early 2000, I could see it happening as well. And I felt like my eyes were starting to open, and I was very excited. I started to read even more and more. I read Dr. Skousen's other books. I read his Making of America book. I started reading his The 5,000-Year Leap, and I started to read anything I could get my hands on related to that whole period. I came across a book called Prophets, Principles, and National Survival, and it was an incredible book. And I really just felt like it was weird. All these books were old. They'd all been published in like the 1970s, 1980s. And some of them in the 1960s, and I felt like they'd all been published kind of before my time. And here I found like a treasure, and I was looking around, I started engaging conversation with people, and I started to wonder: is there anybody out there who is still dialed into these? Is there anyone out there who's still reading these things? And I didn't even know if Dr. Skousen was still alive, to be honest with you. And Les McGuire and I had the opportunity given to us by Brad and Mary Kolovich to go and visit with Dr. Skousen one day. And when we visited with him, that started a friendship that became very special to me, very important to me. I don't talk about it a lot, usually about once a year when I do a tribute to him. And I remember when I met him, I was just very honored to meet him. I didn't plan to take a lot of his time or attention. I dressed up in a suit. Some of you have seen that picture on Facebook of Dr. Skousen and myself and Les McGuire. You'll see that I dressed up in a suit, Les dressed up in shorts and a T-shirt. And, I remember going there and sitting in his living room. I remember meeting his wife. Little did I know that they would later become my family and my children's ancestors. I didn't see that coming. And so I remember that very first meeting. After some period of time, I hadn't said very much at all, and Les kind of had to prod me into a conversation. And we had a very special experience that day with Dr. Skousen, where he and I became friends. And I was very privileged to do that. It was just a year plus that he would die after that. I had a great privilege to be able to go to his home many times. We started a study group that would go to his home once a week. I know other people have had similar experiences, and some of my favorite experiences were just sitting in his living room talking with him and whoever else might be there with us. It was a great honor to me. Dr. Skousen also came to one of Les and I's Free Capitalist seminars, 3-day events. Amazing. Probably one of the last things he did publicly before he passed. And I was able to also see him and share some special times with him right before he passed, thanks to an invitation from Jewel, who I would later marry. Now, my tribute to Dr. Skousen is interesting. For those of you who've heard this before, it's not a different tribute than I've given before. There's a lot of criticism in social media and on the internet about Dr. Skousen, and quite frankly, from people who've never read him and people who've never taken his work seriously. I consider people whose opinions are formed like that worthless, and I invite you to consider the same. I judge Dr. Skousen first and foremost by the work that he did and by the works that he created. And if you want to know about Dr. Skousen and his contribution to the freedom movement and to our world, I invite you to read what he has written. One of the things I said to him, and I've said to many others, Dr. Skousen's notoriety and popularity and even his wealth did not come from any inheritance. It did not come from any position or title in a large organization that he held for a long period of time. It did not come from any promotion or any other person. But his prominence and his widespread social acceptance, his friendships, his bridge building, whether it was to government leaders in South and Central America or Europe, whether it was to religious leaders all across North America and Europe, whether it was the average common person in the freedom movement, Dr. Skousen's reputation was formed by the hard work that virtually everyone pretends to do and almost no one does. And that is the waking up every day, committing yourself to a cause, doing the hard work, building the actual relationships, earning that credential and credibility You know, he wasn't famous or popular because of some advanced degree. He wasn't famous or popular because anybody gave him a credential, although he had credentials. One of the things I respected and admired most about him when he was alive, and that it matters more to me even now that he's gone, is he had such an influence and such a tremendous ability to reach people by the work that he did. And that is a model and example to people, particularly people in the freedom movement. There is no shortcut. There is no easy path. And fame and popularity is not your objective. If you really want to be well respected, and if you really want to make a difference in the lives of people who also love the Lord, love the United States of America, and love liberty, I think Dr. SKOUSEN is a great example to emulate. Do the work. Engage, to quote Gary Vaynerchuk, engage in the hustle. There is no shortcut. And Dr. SKOUSEN, the work that he was able to accomplish in his lifetime in our family, it is often said that he had multiple careers. You know, he has a career with the FBI, he had his career as a chief of police, he had his career as a college professor and religious instructor, he had a career as an advocate for the Constitution and a teacher of the Constitution and the principles of liberty. I don't know if he saw it that way, but I do know that in all of those situations, he wasn't ever given a pass. At least he didn't become famous or popular or credible in any of those venues because he was given a pass. He earned it by building relationships, and even to the end, you know, again, there are people nowadays, like I saw the Mother Jones quotes when they're talking about his influence on Glenn Beck. I've seen the Slate criticisms. I've seen the National Review criticisms. If you want to know something about the man, read what he produced, and then look at who his friends were. It's amazing. His wife, Jewel, who's my wife's grandmother, her biography was just published. She's still alive. And Jewel was reading in her biography about all the different people that they entertained at their home, all the different people they were friends with. And you have to understand, you know, here's a person who lived primarily for the bulk of the 20th century. And the people and the key leaders and influence makers and decision makers that respected him, they understood what I'm telling you, and that is that if you want to get to know a person, get to know them by the work that they do. And for Dr. SKOUSEN, I don't know if I could give him a higher compliment or give him a higher place of honor in my own mind or estimation, because the work that he has done is still relevant today. Anyone who is either a beginning student in the cause of liberty or anyone who feels like they know a lot would do very well, in my opinion, to go back and reread Dr. SKOUSEN as if you were reading him for the first time. I will say something else about Dr. SKOUSEN that relates to you guys, my friends, and it relates to what we've got to do in our day related to the United States of America and the Constitution and the real problem we have with freedom and liberty in America today. Dr. SKOUSEN was friends with many prominent and influential people. And one of the things that he resolved to do ultimately, because of his training in the law, some of you know that in addition to all of his other titles, he was an attorney. And one of the roles or missions that he accepted in life had to do with his role as a person who understood the law. And in the freedom movement, there are very few, maybe 1 in 100, who really understand this. And I want to try to articulate something that I haven't really devoted a lot of effort to in the past, not because I didn't think it was important, but I see it so much more critically now. I'd like to share this with you, and it'll relate to the second part of the call that we have today. It doesn't matter what your political party affiliation is or what your political ideology is to understand this really important concept that Dr. SKOUSEN understood. In the United States of America, our heritage and our history and the nature of our government is such that as tyranny grows, it grows up within the status quo. It grows up within the system of laws and institutions that we have now. Unlike other people on the planet, we were all born, those of us who were born here in the United States, or those of us who have lived here for a long period of time, we all become accustomed to a society that already existed. It was a given for us. We take for granted from the time we're little the institutions around us, the churches, the schools, the businesses, the doctor's offices, the clinics, the the theaters, the dance halls, all those things because of the free society that is our heritage. And we tell stories about our ancestors and the price they paid for those things, whether we talk about the founders, whether we talk about the Civil War, whether we talk about the Great War or the next Great War, whether we talk about anything. The point is, even up through to today, my children were born into a world where they still inherited so many of the blessings of liberty. But that creates a unique challenge because America has been getting worse and worse in the cause of liberty for a long time. Our freedoms have been being eroded for a long time. We go through seasons where they erode slowly, and we go through seasons where they erode rapidly. The last 8 years has been tremendous in terms of the damage to the fabric of our society and building on the moorings and the foundation that the founders laid for us. It was said at Dr. SKOUSEN's funeral by Thomas S. Monson, who's now the president of the LDS Church. It was said when he read a letter from the leadership of the LDS Church that Dr. SKOUSEN's teachings would be the blueprint upon which future leaders and followers would build. Well, I think it's easy to not hear exactly how powerful that statement is because I want to show you something. When you inherit a free society, even if it's damaged, even if it's badly damaged, when you inherit a free society, you still take for granted the ability to exercise your freedoms. So, for example, most people in America still take for granted their freedom of speech. Most people in America still take for granted their freedom to travel. Most people in America take for granted their freedom to work, their freedom to associate. We have major political controversy in all those areas, but generally speaking, we all presume to begin with this idea of our heritage, what we have, and what that means to be America. It's getting harder and harder to do that, and that situation is getting weaker and weaker. But let me show you something. If you want to win in the battle for tyranny, you've got to understand what the battle is. If you want to cure a disease, you've got to know what the disease is. You've got to properly diagnose the disease. A lot of people in the freedom movement haven't properly diagnosed the disease. Dr. SKOUSEN properly diagnosed the disease, but even people who have been students of Dr. SKOUSEN sometimes miss the boat and don't realize it, and I want to share that with you. This very critical thing. If you only take one thing away from this broadcast tonight, this would be the thing to take away. This can change your life, can change your family's future, change your children's future. The way tyranny grows up in a free society is like a weed. In other words, free society doesn't just end overnight. It happens by degrees. And it becomes very hard to fight because it's hard to recognize the difference between tyranny and just bad decisions. And what happens is, most people don't understand this, we have our three divisions of government. Because we're a society of the law and the Constitution, and each of the states have their own constitutions. Again, we just take that for granted. We just assume that that's always the case. No place else in the world do you have that. No place else in the world do you have a union of states with their own independent constitutions that united under a broad charter, a broad constitution. Nothing. You won't find that in Europe and Asia. Nothing even close. South America, Central America, nothing even close. Now, because of that, however, we take it for granted again. We misunderstand the role of government. We misunderstand the nature of government. And what happens is people get hired or elected or appointed into positions of power and influence in our government, whatever branch of the government it is. It doesn't matter whether it's the executive like the police power, the regulatory power, the bureaucratic power. It doesn't matter whether it's the judicial, whether you're a judge or court clerk or even an attorney who works in that space. It doesn't matter whether you're in the legislative, like a state legislator, a city council member, a federal legislator. It doesn't matter. Those three different branches serve different functions, but there's a critical function for the judiciary. And that is, in a republic, the courts are open. And what that means is that free citizens in a free society have the right to use the court, both when they're accused and when they want to accuse. And we've been trained, taught, and educated in a world since easily the 1930s not to use the courts. Most citizens have no idea how to use the courts. We fear the courts. We elect our executives. We show respect to our police. Again, this is getting weaker, but I'm talking about the tradition. We elect our lawmakers. We put demands on them to pass laws, etc. We do very little with the executive, and here's the problem. Here's the problem with that. The average citizen does not feel comfortable in a courtroom. The average citizen views the courtroom with fear and trepidation. The average citizen cannot speak the language of the courtroom. And because citizens can't, that language becomes more and more specialized, and it becomes more and more difficult and more corrupted actually over time because the citizens aren't using it. You've heard this idea that if you don't use your right, you can lose it. Well, that is more true in the executive branch of the government than any of the other branches of the government because the citizens don't use the courts. Matter of fact, the courts have become almost an entirely foreign world to the average citizen. When you go into a courtroom, the judge and the prosecutor or an attorney and the jury and the bailiff and the court clerk, they all seem to understand what's going on. But your average citizen who's there for the first time or the first time in a long time, they don't even understand the procedures. They just look for guidance and direction. They certainly don't know how to assert themselves, and if they do, they don't know how to assert themselves effectively. This has created a problem, and let me show you why. Let me show you this. In our country, our destiny is to be a free people or to lose freedom. And Ronald Reagan talked about that in his speeches in the 1960s, where he talked about a time of choosing. And America has a history in our political rhetoric of talking about whether America is the last best hope on earth for freedom. And Reagan used to talk about whether we're a shining city on a hill or not. And what kind of future are we going to give our children? Even Marco Rubio in the current presidential election cycle keeps using this metaphor. What kind of world are we leaving our children? What kind of world are we leaving behind? You see, there's a question of whether Americans are going to reclaim liberty and further the work of the founders and push forward the cause of liberty, or whether we're going to surrender the concept of self-government. Some of you have heard the statement from Benjamin Franklin that said that the founders gave us a republic if we can keep it. Well, if you want to keep it, and that's probably why you're on this call, either you or someone who's recommended you to get on this broadcast has talked to you about freedom, or you love freedom, and you want to see us win in the cause of liberty, but you've got to diagnose the problem, my friends. The problem is not our laws, though we have problems with our laws. The problem is not our elected officials, though we have major problems with our elected officials. And the problem is not even the corruptions in the judiciary and corrupt judges, though we have those in spades. There's a different problem. It has to do with us, and it has to do with how we fight for freedom and how we defend liberty. Because we inherited a free society, the way tyranny grows in a free society is it abuses the law. Tyrants, whether small or large, grow tyranny in America by abusing the law, by abusing the Constitution, by abusing the state constitutions, by abusing federal law, by abusing state law, by abusing local municipal codes, by abusing the law. And by abusing the law, what I mean is the executive abuses the law by prosecuting unfairly and unjustly and not recognizing the limits, the self-imposed limits of the law. The legislature abuses the law by passing laws without reading them, by passing laws that go into domains that they, by principle, do not have any right to be in. The judiciary abuses the law by not upholding it, by implementing rules that are contravening our rights, etc. The way tyranny grows in America is through the abuse of law. That's, for example, why so many people talk about needing to restore the Constitution or needing to save the Constitution. That's why people say the Constitution is hanging by the thread, because it's the supreme law of the land, and it's tattered and torn. And so what happens is, if you don't understand that the way tyranny grows in America every day, in all three branches of the government, is when individuals abuse the law. They use the law as a weapon inappropriately. There's only two ways to respond to that. Because back of the law is force. The legitimacy of every law in the United States, whether it is constitutional or statutory or common law, the authority of the law of the United States has back of it the police power of the executive branch of the government. Force. So what happens is, when the law is used as a weapon against the people, when the government gets too large and the law is used against the people unjustly, then there's only two ways to change our course. We either have to defend ourselves with the law, we have to defend ourselves by exercising our rights and using the law, or we have to resort to defending ourselves with force. Those are the only two options. And the American people have largely abdicated that first approach, and therefore we're seeing more and more people resorting to the second approach. The reason why, it doesn't matter whether it's left or right, you can go to the Occupy Wall Street or the Occupy Campus movements or the Black Lives Matter movements. Those involve force, people destroying property, people taking over, possessing, occupying places, and rebelling against governmental authority, whether it's executive, judicial, legislative. That because what's happening is they're tired, they're revolting, rightly or wrongly, they're revolting against how the law is being used against them. And because they don't know or have faith in their ability to defend themselves with the law, they resort to the thing that's more natural to them, which is force. It's what's happening, for example, up in Oregon. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But here's your choice. This is your choice as a mother or a father, or just as a free man or free woman. As our society faces an increasing challenge related to the loss of our freedoms, as our government is more and more overgrown, as our leaders are less and less principled, as we have more and more major problems in the United States, as we get further and further away from the founders, the law has grown and the law has become an oppressive force for people. And it's increasingly so. I just read, for example, today there was a news report that says that Orrin Hatch and another member of Congress are part of this judicial reform, or criminal justice reform that they're working on in the federal level now. They're passing a law that has to do with criminal intent, and they're trying to pass a law that says we shouldn't put citizens in jail who accidentally break the law. Now, most of you have no idea what they're talking about, but increasingly in the United States, there are people who are being put in prison under federal law, let alone state laws, for violating laws that they did not mean to violate, that they didn't even know they were violating. The examples in this press release were, consider this, a man who finds a skull when he's digging, and he turns it in to the local Bureau of Land Management. But he's charged with desecrating an ancient history site of the Native Americans and goes to prison. Or a small boy who is playing baseball and finds an injured bird, and he takes the injured bird and tries to help it and calls the government, Humane Society, or whatever their animal control is, and is charged with disturbing an endangered species. We have this happening more and more. Those are extreme examples, but it happens in business. It happens everywhere where there's so many laws. To check out what they said. They said we really need to pass a law that says we can't just charge people with crimes unless we prove there's criminal intent. Now, that used to be a standard staple in American jurisprudence, but citizens haven't known to use that as a defense, and so it's gone extinct. That concept is gone out the window because you don't use it. You don't use it when you get your speeding tickets or your parking tickets. You don't even know what I'm talking about or why I just brought that up. But so here's the point of the matter. In this article, what Senator Hatch was saying is he said, what you don't understand is there are about 500 new federal laws passed every year. And what he says is that you can't expect the citizens to know all of them. Well, a lot of people want to tackle that by saying, well, we need to elect different lawmakers then. Well, we need to repeal some of those laws then. We need to change the executive. We need to change the prosecutors. Yes, we need to do all those things, but that won't solve the problem. What solves the problem in a free society, if you don't want to defend yourself, if you don't want things to deteriorate to the point where you have to use force, here's what Cleon SKOUSEN taught, and here's what his works testify of, and here's the critical principle if you want to be effective in helping America fulfill its destiny. As a citizen, you as an individual, and then you and your home and your family, and then you and your friends and your community, and then we grow out from there. As a citizen, you have a duty and an obligation to learn when the law is being used as a weapon against you, how to use the law as a defense. If you cannot defend your liberty by using the law as a defense, you will ultimately have to resort, or you will pass on to your children, who will ultimately have to resort to the use of force to defend our liberty. which is why J. Reuben Clark said years ago, we've already lost so many of our freedoms, we may have to come to a time where it takes blood, the spilling of blood, to bring our freedoms back, our liberties back. The remedy to that, and Cleon Skousen taught this, he knew because of his background in law, and if you read the introduction to his work, The Majesty of God's Law, he talks about this. He knew that if we're going to teach people about the founders, if we're going to teach people about the history of America, we had to teach them from the perspective of citizenry so that we can use our rights and we can use our minds, and as citizens we can go into open courts and defend ourselves. That is a great work, my friends. That's civics. We have lost civics. It's been 60 years for most people. If we do not learn quickly how to defend our liberty with the law, there will be nothing else to resort to except for force. And so it's so powerful. When you read his books, I saw a comment on here that Dr. Skousen was always positive and full of hope. He said, I know we're going to win because I've read the book, and in the end we win. Well, the way we win, my friends, is we have to elevate our game. We have to rise up. We have to take ownership for what it means to be a citizen. It's not just good enough to read in your own study. It's not just good enough to be an opinionated political leader in your own home. It is an incumbent duty upon the lovers of liberty to learn, it's a civic duty, to learn how to use the law on your own and with your neighbors and friends to protect your liberties and to advance the cause of liberty. And perhaps the best tribute that I could end with here to Dr. Skousen is his blueprint lays out the formula for how we can restore the Constitution of the United States and restore America to its path of greatness and finish the work that the founder started as free men and women who can accomplish this within the structure, as badly damaged as it is and as in bad a shape as we are in. If we will learn how to love and cherish and use the law. See, it's being used against us by people, by the way, who are not that bright. Some of you know I work as a legal analyst and as a legal litigation strategist for various attorneys and law firms. And it's surprising to me how little the lawyers and the judges and the elected officials often know about the law. And I've learned for myself that as free citizens, we don't have to be crazy. We don't have to join some fringe movement. We don't have to develop some far-out theories. All those things are interesting hobbies. But as a citizen, we have a duty to learn the basic principles of how to engage with our government and how to participate in our government. And for most of us, we have this false illusion and false hope that means voting. That's why all these presidential debates and everything get so controversial, and why all the news coverage is the only thing you do. I mean, it's the only way most people participate in their government. That's why it's gone to hell. And so if we want to turn it around, we can turn it around quickly by waking up and learning what we can do. And it starts, the way you defend your rights is first and foremost in the courtrooms. There's clearly work to do in the legislatures. There's clearly work to do in the executive. We must elect good people. We must have a strategy to support good people in office. That is critical. But more critical, in the area that has been neglected, we have almost a foreign branch of government where no force can be maintained in the United States. No force can be maintained or sustained ultimately without the approval of the judiciary. The President of the United States is in fact the commander-in-chief when there's a war with a foreign enemy. And the governors of the states are in fact the leaders of their own militias. That is true. But the courts are open. And as citizens, it is incumbent upon us to learn how to work with others and how to unite with others and how to coordinate with others so that the courtroom is not a foreign place for us and that victories in the courtroom are not foreign things. There is still great promise and great potential And sadly, people are giving up on that because of the neglect for a long period of time. It's like we have a blood clot, and it's going to be a dangerous thing, and it's going to be a scary thing, but it could kill us if we don't change our course. My tribute to Dr. SKOUSEN is ultimately personal because he had such an influence on my life. Not his personality, though I loved his personality. He was so friendly, so unassuming, so humble, and yet a very powerful and influential man. What great qualities. It wasn't his personality, however, that had so much of an effect on my life. His family, I love his family. They're now my family. He's now an ancestor of my children. I consider it a great honor, but that's still not the source of my respect and initial admiration for Dr. SKOUSEN. As is the invitation to all men, we're here on earth to accomplish something. Every one of you within the sound of my voice, you have a certain gift or talent or package of gifts and talents to use on this earth. And Dr. SKOUSEN used his, and in using his, he blessed us. He blessed his generation, and he blessed future generations. And his work earned him the esteem and praise of other very important and significant men and women on this earth. And those men and women whose esteem and praise call Dr. SKOUSEN a friend, their opinions matter to me because I have learned for myself that he's a friend of liberty, he's a friend of America, and he's a friend of all the sons and daughters of God. Now, I want to transition to a different topic. I want to talk about what's going on up in Oregon, and we won't have a lot of time to talk about it, but I, as some of you know, have been trying to have some communications with some of the leaders in what's going on up in Oregon. And there are a lot of people, they're very critical of what's going on up in Oregon, and there's a lot of people who have opinions, obviously, about what's going on up in Oregon. And as I've watched a lot of these conversations, it's become very apparent to me, and very sad, quite frankly, that so many of you and so many of my friends in the liberty movement do not understand the purpose and principles behind civil disobedience. I saw someone earlier post a comment here on Periscope, and they said the Second Amendment. And some of you know a little bit more about the Second Amendment than others. Some of you have heard my teachings on the Second Amendment. Even the modern Supreme Court, in Justice Scalia's very powerfully written Heller decision, explained that the Second Amendment's primary purpose is not for the outdoorsman. And even though it serves self-defense, it's not primarily for individual self-defense. This scares the heck out of liberals. This scares the heck out of progressives. This scares the heck out of brain-off people. It even scares the heck out of... Boy, I didn't just put all those sounds together on purpose. It even scares the heck out of some Republicans and conservatives and libertarians. The fundamental purpose and the primary reason for the Second Amendment is that so the citizens have the ability to deter and repel tyranny from their own government. I want you to think about that. I didn't invent that. That's not some fringe concept. That is the central theme to the second enumerated amendment to the Bill of Rights. And the first time the United States Supreme Court, this is not some ancient principle that has worn out its usefulness or timeliness, as some people would have you believe. It's not something that's antiquated. Matter of fact, it was taken for granted for so long, the Supreme Court never had to make this pronouncement. But within the last decade, I think so. When was the Heller decision? Let me look. Yeah, that's the District of Columbia v. Heller case. It's from 2008. And let me just pull it up real quick. I want to share with you a quote from Justice Scalia. All right. Here's what he says. This is from a 2008 Supreme Court decision. See, you won't find this on CNN or on Fox News. In interpreting the text of the Second Amendment, Here is what the Supreme Court held in 2008. There are many reasons why this right to bear arms and this militia are necessary, quote, to the security of a free state. It says, first, of course, and I'm going to quote, first, of course, this is the Supreme Court of the United States in our day. This isn't Jefferson or Madison or Adams. This is modern thought and governing Supreme Court decision in America regarding the Second Amendment. Now listen to this. Quote, first, of course, it is useful in repelling invasions and suppressing insurrections. Second, it renders large standing armies unnecessary. And I'm going to forward, still quoting. Third, when the able-bodied men of a nation are trained in arms and organized, they are better able to resist tyranny. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. Don't comment. I challenge you to control yourself for a minute. And think very slowly and deliberately for a minute. If from the time of Benjamin Franklin through to our day, the Second Amendment has been a standard for the protection of our republic and the rights of our people. And in 2008, it is reaffirmed as a standard and elaborated in very specific reference to what it means. And in that mainstream thought related to liberty and freedom, the Second Amendment, our right to bear arms and to organize ourselves into militias, quote, we are better able to resist tyranny. See, some people want to pretend that tyranny isn't a real risk. Some people want to pretend that tyranny only exists in other countries, or in the movies, or in our history. Some people want to pretend that it's unpolite, or uncivil, or immoral to suggest that our current leaders could be abusing the law and acting in tyranny. Some people want to label that as fringe. Some people want to label that as fanatical. But that has been mainstream doctrine of the United States of America from the day of our founding through to the modern time. That tyranny is a real risk to the survival of this people, of this republic. Tyranny. We must maintain our rights, including this particular right, and exercise that right, because according to the current law of the land, the supreme law of the land, in the interpretation of that law, we are better able to resist tyranny. Now, why? Let me just please think. There is never, ever going to be a polite way to bear arms. You do not resist tyranny with a water gun. You do not resist tyranny with a pea shooter. You could not. It would be a mockery to suggest that you resist tyranny by having an invisible concealed weapon. People who are suggesting that the standoff in Oregon is terrorism are intellectually injured or wicked. If you do not understand this basic concept, there is a difference between exercising your opinion and your politics while simultaneously bearing arms There's a difference between that and acting in terror. How many terrorists shake hands with sheriffs? How many terrorists invite the media up to their encampment? How many terrorists have an open door policy for anyone to come and go, men, women, and children? How many terrorists speak politely day in and day out? How many terrorists articulate that their defense is not religion or revelation, but their defense is the law? You may disagree with these men, which is your right, and you may even be right. But you better, as an American, be able to make the distinction between a person who understands that it is a moral and civic imperative to be able to resist tyranny. The only alternative is to pretend that it's never, ever going to be your job to resist tyranny. And if you want to indulge in that fantasy, you are no friend of freedom. It's never cosmopolitan to resist tyranny. People say to me, but I don't like it, Rick. They're like bullies, they're like crazy. They're like bat crap crazy, Rick. They're not out there swinging weapons. It's the FBI who's closing down schools, and it's the FBI who's walking out there in full tactical gear. I want to be very clear. Resisting tyranny means if you ever have to engage, I'm not talking about now using a weapon for killing an elk. I'm not talking about using a weapon to repel an intruder into your home. I'm not talking about using a weapon in some kind of sport or competition. If the right to bear arms is essential so that Americans have the ability to resist tyranny, you have to understand, and it's self-evidently true if you think about it, that the tyrants won't like that. The tyrants would want to stop that. Be careful, my friends, that you are not inadvertently on the side of the tyrants. Americans who calmly and rationally exercise their right to bear arms in defiance, in resistance to tyranny, are nothing like those people who indiscriminately shoot innocents in shopping malls and schools and public streets. They are nothing like ISIS. I am so sick of the brain-off, weak-minded, double-minded, impotent voices who say that Ammon, Bundy, and his friends up in Oregon are no different than ISIS. Anyone who says that is either so woefully uneducated as to what's happening in this world, or they are wicked. ISIS is rounding up people who they disagree with and decapitating them and burning them and raping them and exporting that philosophy across the earth. These men are standing 30 miles away from civilization, peacefully, calmly, articulating their position, inviting lawmakers to come, citing the Constitution. They may be wrong. But now let me speak to this. There are people who say, oh, they're wrong. And I was disappointed. Ted Cruz is my hero. Ted Cruz, in my opinion, is an educated, intelligent man. Donald Trump's not intelligent when it comes to the Constitution. Chris Christie is not intelligent when it comes to the Constitution. Carly Fiorina is not. These people who are criticizing by saying, well, there is a proper way to deal with this. There's a proper way to air your grievances. I read some brain-off, impotent, numbskull person who wrote an essay recently that said, these men have misunderstood America. they should be taking their grievances through the proper channels. And this militant action is un-American. Well, I've got two answers to that. The first one you probably haven't thought of. The second one you have, but the first one you probably haven't thought of. If Ammon Bundy and his friends are to be criticized for not taking their grievance to the proper forum, and if you think there is a proper forum for that grievance, will you also then admit that the men and women who work for the federal and state and county governments also have a proper forum in which to air their grievances? If the law is abused to exercise violence and death up there, the blood will be on the hands of those men and women who, by the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Oregon, owe these citizens due process. If they think, like Denny just posted, that Ammon Bundy misunderstands the Constitution, and I'm not so sure he does, but if that is true, he is a free man standing in defense of what he sees as tyranny, and our law that you accuse him of breaking, also requires that just because you work for the government, you don't have free rein to act with blood and horror. You too must conform your conduct to the power and authority of the law. And that is a dispute that must be arbitrated in an appropriate tribunal under federal, state, or county law. Everyone is so quick to say, well, these guys are doing it the wrong way. Well, so too are the people who are militarizing, sending military equipment, automatic assault weapons, flak jackets, and tactical teams without even talking to these men. I talked to them today. I know firsthand a little of what's going on. And no one can tell me that the government is exhausted the duty that they have to protect free citizens. Now, here's the second argument. I'm not done with that first argument. You see, my friends, in a free society, none of us are above the law. But what is the role of civil disobedience? What is the role of civil disobedience? Are citizens duty bound to comply with every pronouncement of law? You see here, let me give you an example. The congressman from this district in Oregon spoke openly and publicly on the floor of the House about a bill that he wrote. Somebody, let me ban. A Rockefeller, are you sincere or are you a dumbass? Do you even know what Marxism is? Okay, so if you really believe that Marxism is the answer, then what you're saying, okay, if you really believe Marx, what you're saying is that force through revolution is the path to equality. Rockefeller. Yeah, so what you're saying is the ends justify the means. You want an equal society and you're willing to use force to get it. And who gets to decide what is equal? Who gets to decide what is equal? Let me show you this. Yeah, there's no such thing. The people have no voice. We've got socialism now. We don't have Marxism now. But here, let me give you an example. Here's a perfect example. You've got a representative of the people in the Congress who passes a law. He wrote the law to limit the BLM, which is the executive branch of the government, and to define what's fair. I am staying focused, Jason. Listen to this. The Congress of the United States writes a law, passes a law, limiting what the BLM, which is the executive branch of the government, can do. And the congressman on the floor of the House says, I wrote the law. I know what the law means. And the BLM is ignoring the law. Then, the ranchers in that area took the BLM to court. And because they lacked resources, and because the BLM had the excessive resources of the government behind them, the BLM was never forced to comply with the law. So you have the law, and then you have the executives who say, we don't have to comply with the law. Then what do? The people who say that Ammon should go home, he's not part of Oregon, that the ranchers should go to court, the ranchers did go to court. Educate yourself. What would you do? The BLM is burning your land. They're murdering your cows, your property, killing your cows. They're putting your own lives at risk. They're setting fires on your property. They're refusing to conform to the law. They're destroying your livelihood. You, as a free citizen, are not compelled to obey the abuse of law. Think about this, my friends. Think about this when we're talking about civil disobedience. I know a lot of you are Mormons. Mormons believe in obeying and sustaining the law. What happens when the executive branch of the government has grown? I don't care if you're a Mormon. I just know there are a lot of Mormons. You live in a society where there are Mormons. You live in a society where there are Christians. You live in a society where there are atheists. Listen to what I'm saying if you want to have anything out of this. If you believe in the law, if you believe in the Constitution, what do when the executive branch won't conform their behavior to the law? Of course you try to use the courts. Of course you try to get the legislature more involved. Of course you petition for redress. But they're burning your property. They're destroying your livelihood. They're starving you. They're forcing you against the law. That's tyranny. There is a time when peace only works to the advantage of the tyrant. When there are two opposing sides to an issue, and one has abandoned principles, peace ensures the victory of the tyrant. Let me say it again. When there are two sides in a conflict, and one has abandoned principle, the one who holds to principle will lose because violence will be used against them. That's the quote I put up on Facebook about Martin Luther King, recognizing that even the nonviolent advocates like Gandhi recognize that in those situations, you must be able to use force to resist tyranny. The question that no one is asking about the civil disobedience going on up in Oregon is, are they acting in principled defiance or resistance against tyranny. That's what they say they're doing. And they have a right, as citizens of the United States, not to be killed until a fair tribunal hears their grievance. These men, whether you agree with them or not, are acting in resistance of tyranny. This county, this section of Oregon, this section of the United States is living under a great overstretch of the federal government. When is civil disobedience justified? Civil disobedience is justified when the harm exceeds the ability for regular remedy. When the harm exceeds the ability of those being harmed to pursue a regular remedy, the only alternative is civil disobedience. And if that fails, there will be uncivil disobedience. So be careful. Be careful when you criticize whether it's the Ferguson protests or the Black Lives Matter protests on the left, or whether it's not about grazing land. Grazing is way down the chain. Have you heard about the recordings of government bureaucrats setting fires and saying, burn the Hammonds out? If a free citizen were caught on a recording starting a fire with the intentional purpose of burning a family out of their property, they would go to prison. You may not agree with these boys. That's your right. You may even have intelligent argument. But when we pay attention to first principles, everybody says, I see these articles, they say, well, if they were black, the government would have gone in there and killed them. That doesn't make it right. What the government has done unjustly to other groups is not right. I've heard people say this is their white privilege. Therefore, we should take it away. It's not their white privilege. It's their privilege as citizens. And if your complaint is that other citizens and other groups are being denied those privileges, the answer isn't to take away the privilege from others. It's to make sure we protect the privilege for everyone. And you're not going to defend freedom and liberty for blacks or Hispanics or Asians or homosexuals or religious people or atheists. You're not going to defend their liberty if you can't learn to make the distinction between privilege of a citizen that we're all entitled to and depravity and tyranny that's hurting. The solution to tyranny isn't to equally distribute tyranny. It is not an argument to say, well, if this was a bunch of inner city people, the government would come in them with, hellfire and damnation. And that would be wrong. And you should thank God that there are cowboys up in Oregon who are showing the principled path to civil disobedience. You see, let me show you another thing. They don't have to be right to exercise their rights. They don't have to prove their right first to exercise their rights. Neither do you. That's what our whole third branch of government is about. That's what the whole justice system is about. You get to go into a courtroom on equal footing. And before anyone decides whether you're right or somebody else is right, you have the right to exercise your right. These men and women have chosen to exercise their right. Yes, you don't want to go to jail, and if that's you choose. You don't choose to stand up for liberty sometimes. I understand. In the civil rights movement, there were people who didn't march with Martin Luther King because they didn't want to have the negative consequences. In the Revolutionary War, there were people who didn't stand with Washington because they didn't want to lose favor from the British government. In World War II, there are people who didn't want to stand against Hitler because of the consequences to them. We all have to make those choices. But in a free society, in the United States of America, I'm appealing to you people who are on this call who have a little bit more thought power. You wouldn't be participating if you weren't a little bit more thinking than others. You're thinking, so I'm inviting you to use your mind, my friends. These men don't have to be right first to earn the right to exercise their rights. They're acting in civil disobedience. They may be wrong. They may be wrong. But standing up for their rights is right. They are better able to resist tyranny. The question isn't whether they have the right to resist tyranny. The appropriate question is, are they resisting tyranny? Is it tyranny? Is it tyranny? Oh, they are causing some harm. Yeah, of course, they're causing some harm. They're spending electricity. They're occupying buildings. They're keeping people from doing their jobs. It's not severe harm. And if they're wrong, they will have to pay. That's the way our country works. But they are not wrong to stand up for their rights. No citizen is wrong to stand up for their rights. The question, and this is the sad thing, the question, whenever anyone exercises civil disobedience, is to ask yourself, what are they being disobedient to? Are they being disobedient to the law? Or are they being disobedient to tyrants? That's the first question. Was Rosa Parks being disobedient to the law or to tyrants? Were the founders, when they signed the Declaration of Independence, were they being disobedient to the law or to tyrants? One of my favorite examples of this kind of civil disobedience was an example that a former Supreme Court judge in Utah and current leader in the LDS Church, Dallin Oaks, used years ago when he talked about the tyranny being exercised over certain Asian populations where women were not allowed, if I remember right, to read and to be in libraries. And a member of the LDS Church exercised civil disobedience and occupied a library. Now, I don't remember the details. I just remember the generalities. And I remember Dallin Oaks praising her because she stood up peacefully, civilly, for her rights. These men did not take their weapons and start shooting the sheriff or BLM agents or Division of Wildlife and the Forest Service agents. They did not use their arms and start blowing up cars and burning buildings. They acted civilly in disobedience to resist what they have said was tyranny, and they've outlined what the tyranny is. They now, as free citizens, have the right to have their government and their peers and their countrymen question, is there tyranny? Because if they're resisting tyranny, we should be standing with them. If they're resisting tyranny, they are serving all of us. If they are resisting tyranny, they are doing righteousness. The question is, what is the tyranny that they claim? And let's look and see if it's tyrannical. For example, when Rosa Parks was told that she had to sit at the back of the bus, she sat at the front of the bus. She didn't blow the bus up. She sat at the front of the bus to illustrate a point. When women were denied the right to vote, they showed up at the polls and protested. They didn't go to the sporting goods store. They showed up at the polls. Civil disobedience happens where the principles are in conflict. The alleged principles are in conflict. If the federal government was using this land at this refuge and these resources at this refuge to deprive free citizens of their rights, and by occupying this facility peacefully, they've stopped the tyranny and brought peace. I love it when the news media interviews people in this city that's 30 miles away. They say the people in the city of Burns want the protesters to go. First of all, that's not true. There are some in the city who do. There are some in the city who don't. I understand that. But remember, that's a city 20 to 30 miles away. No one is taking a survey and tallied the results of the ranchers who have been directly affected by the actions of the executive branch of our government from this base of operation in the refuge. You see, until those facts come out, it would be premature to even say that these men are wrong. Oh, I'm not defending them and saying they've acted with perfection. I've seen some craziness up there. I've seen some of their supposed alternative media friends who are a little crazy. I've seen some of these groups that are a little crazy, but aren't we all? Aren't we all a little crazy? Aren't we all a little odd? That's why we have little groups of friends here and little groups of friends there. And your family a little weird. Isn't the mess of your life a little weird? You see, in America, you don't have to earn your freedom. You don't have to earn your liberty. You don't have to prove that you're normal and good to exercise your rights. It's the other way around. Our laws limit the government. They're not allowed to pronounce you guilty or to pronounce you a terrorist until they've complied with the law. And if anybody's listening to the sound of my voice, I think one of the things that ought to be done immediately is the filing of a writ of mandamus, first in state court in Oregon and then in federal court in Oregon. A writ of mandamus against the sheriff and against that local judge who have been calling these men terrorists and criminals, which exceeds their authority under the law. A writ of mandamus is the lawful method in the United States of America to first seek redress through the courts when an executive branch of the government is not doing their duty. Most citizens don't know this. You should have learned this in 4th grade. When an official in the executive branch of the government is not carrying out their duty under the law, the first path for redress, besides private communication, is a writ of mandamus. But you don't even know what a writ of mandamus is. There's some of you who spend all this time studying sovereign citizen movements and worry about whether there's gold fringe on the flag, which doesn't help you at all. And you haven't learned the rules of civil procedure, and you haven't learned who has standing to bring a writ of mandamus, which court has jurisdiction over a local judge, which court has jurisdiction upon which you can bring the writ of mandamus. How do you do it? What's the rules? What's the form? How do you participate as a free citizen? See, here's my criticism of the freedom movement. Here's my criticism of the liberty movement. Protesting Obamacare is good. Protesting excessive legislation is good. Campaigning for presidents or congressmen is good, but neither compare to the individual power and change free citizens can make if they knew how to exercise their rights in the courts, if they knew how to use the law to advocate for liberty. My friends, it's time to rally the forces. Would you, if you have received value from this broadcast tonight, would you go to Facebook in the Free Capitalist group, invite your Facebook friends. You can invite 1,000, I think, before Facebook gets mad. would you invite your friends to go to freecapitalist.com and put their email in so they get on our email list? If you think that what I'm saying to you has created some value for you, if you see that this might be a little different than the talking heads you normally listen to, if you see that there might be some value here, will you help us? It's time to mobilize. It is time to get going. It is time to stand up and shake the dust off. It is time to make a difference. I, for one, am going to be seeing what I can do to influence this situation up in Oregon and to influence the other situations going on in our country. I have been slowly and quietly, as some of you know, rebuilding the Free Capitalist Project with some of your help, with some friends. It's time to shift gears. We're going to be shifting from first gear into the higher gears. I invite you to come with us. And by doing that, you can do some simple things. Help us grow our audience. Help us get more people on these broadcasts. My friends, it's time to wake up and turn our brains on. We've got a bright future if we choose it. I listened to Sean Hannity. I listened to Rush Limbaugh. I listened the other day to Glenn Beck, and they're all talking about the perilous times we're in. But there's a silver lining, my friends. More and more people are waking up wondering what in the hell is going on and what are we going to do about it. And there are only two choices to battle tyranny. The law is being used as a weapon against us. We must learn how to mobilize individually and collectively to use the law in defense of our liberty. And we must learn how to resist tyranny by acting in principle. That's all I've got for you. I hope to join you again in the very near future. Spread the word. Warm regards.